real story of Beauty and the Beast. Isabel, whom everyone simply called Belle, was not merely a lover of books. She was a mistress of accounts, a pragmatic genius of dwindling stores, and the quiet, iron-spined architect of her family's survival. Her father, Maurice, was a merchant who mistook hope for strategy, sinking their remaining fortune into one last, ill-conceived venture to the northern ports. Belle watched him go, not with the tearful affection of a dutiful daughter in a ballad, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a clerk watching a ship sail into a permanent fog. Her sisters, Rosalie and Clarice, complained of broken gloves and stale bread. Belle focused on the woodpile and the threadbare cloaks. Their house was not a cottage of quaint hardship, but a monument to a wealthy man's spectacular failure. The weeks turned to months. The debt collectors grew impatient, and the winter deepened. Belle knew her father was lost, either to the snows or to the shame, when a gaunt, shivering carriage horse, Maurice's favorite, returned alone, its harness snapped and its eyes wide with residual terror. Maurice was still out there, alive, but wandering in the wild, forgotten stretches of the Haute Forêt, a place of ill repute and ancient chill. 3 days later, Maurice stumbled into their parlor, looking less like a man and more like a bundle of rags soaked in desperation and snowmelt. He collapsed onto the hearth, clutching a single, impossibly dark red rose, its petals edged with frost. "Belle," he choked, his voice dry as leaves, "Belle, I have ruined us. Not with the money, but with this damn flower." He recounted his journey, the failure of the ports, the refusal of his creditors, and his attempt to take a shortcut through a forgotten stretch of mountainous territory. There, hidden beneath a canopy of pines that seemed to draw the light out of the air, he found a structure, a castle of black, igneous rock, vast and silent. It wasn't ruined by time, it was ruined by design, built to intimidate and terrify. He found the single rose bush, miraculously thriving beneath a glass dome in the middle of a courtyard where fountains should have been. It was the only splash of color in a world of slate and soot. He took the rose for Belle, a last, foolish gesture of love, and in doing so, he broke the ancient, terrible covenant of the place. The beast appeared not in a flash of smoke, but simply was there, standing in the middle of the courtyard as Maurice turned to flee. He was not merely a man cloaked in fur. He was a composition of anatomical cruelties. His skin was taut and grayish-black like hardened leather. His ears were elongated and sharp, his teeth too many and too uneven. The most horrifying aspect was his eyes, large, intelligent, and human, yet filled with a profound, aching weariness that suggested centuries of solitude. He moved with the slow, pained dignity of a condemned king. "You took the only thing I hold dear." The beast's voice was a deep, grating baritone accustomed to silence. "The only thing this place permits to flourish. The law of this land is simple, merchant. Life for life. You trespass, you steal, you forfeit your days." Maurice, shaking uncontrollably, confessed to his daughters. The very next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Belle strapped a leather satchel to her waist, kissed her father on the brow, and took a small, nervous draught of cold tea. "Father," she said, her voice steady, "tell me precisely where this castle is. I am going to settle your debt." "Nonsense. I won't allow it. He is a monster. He is an accounting error, Papa. And I am the only one capable of balancing the books." She fixed her father with a gaze that held neither resentment nor fear, only grim necessity. "If you stay, the authorities will take the house, and your life will be over soon anyway. If I go, you have the house, you have time, and I have a chance, however slim, to bargain." She rode the restored horseback toward the dark forest, driven not by the noble sacrifice of a heroine, but by the cold logic of a final, desperate gamble. The beast received her with a kind of clinical resignation. He had expected the merchant to fail or to return with a small bribe of coin. He had not expected this girl, small, practical, and carrying a small satchel that clearly contained a journal and a pen, not jewels. "You come to replace him?" he asked, standing by the single, preserved rose bush. "I do," Belle replied, pulling her cloak tight against the penetrating cold that seemed to originate from the stone itself. But I do not offer my death. That is a poor transaction. I offer my labor, my service, my companionship. You will die alone here, sooner or later. My father will die anyway. You gain nothing from death. But from a servant, from a companion, you gain a human presence, a steward. I will remain here until my father dies, or until you release me. The beast stared at her for a long time, the only movement a slow, agonizing tightening of his massive fists. He was unused to negotiation, and used to resistance that wasn't accompanied by screams or tears. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the complete absence of romance, and a small, forgotten ember of his former intellect found it compelling. The curse will not allow me to release you, he finally said. Not until the bargain is complete. You must stay here until you learn to love me, despite this form, or until the rose dies, and I am finished. Love is not a promise I can make, Belle stated firmly. But I am a woman of my word. I will stay. On one condition, I must have access to the library, and I require enough heat to survive the winter. I am of no use to you, Dad. The beast, in the only moment of genuine surprise he'd had in a decade, nodded. Done. Welcome, Isabel, to your cage. The castle was a masterpiece of magical maintenance and emotional neglect. The dining room was immense, the table set perfectly each night with steaming, delicious food, yet Belle ate alone. The fires in her hearth were magically sustained, giving off warmth but no comforting scent of wood smoke, yet she slept in a four-poster bed draped in rich, ancient silks. She never saw a servant. The work of the castle was done by a residual enchantment that focused entirely on sustaining the beast and his captive. It was a cold, precise magic, incapable of the small, loving touches that make a house a home. Belle settled into a routine dictated by necessity. She ate, she cleaned her own chamber, she refused to rely on the impersonal magic, and she spent her days in the library. It was not the magnificent, organized library of legend, but a repository of forgotten knowledge, thousands of volumes covered in centuries of dust, some spine-broken and others still chained to the shelves. It was here, surrounded by the silence of dead authors, that she began to find a curious kind of freedom. She wasn't just reading novels, she was studying ancient history, architecture, and political economy. She was training her mind for a world she might never rejoin. The beast always came at night. He would stand at the doorway to the dining hall or linger in the shadows of the gallery, watching her during the solitary meals. He never spoke, and she never acknowledged him directly. One evening, after 3 months of this silent, dreadful theater, Belle broke the routine. The northern wing of the roof is failing, she announced, without looking up from her bowl of pheasant soup. A heavy silence followed. The water from the ice melt is pooling above the tapestry room, she continued, slicing her bread with perfect composure. If you do not divert the drainage, the entire interior wall will collapse before the spring thaw. The damage will be extensive. The beast stepped fully into the light, his shadow stretching across the flagstones. How do you know this? I know the sound of structural rot, my lord. My father dealt in timber. I know the sound of a wall weeping. This castle, sir, is not cursed because of your face. It is cursed because you let it rot around you. It is a monument to neglect. He did not roar. He simply stood motionless, absorbing the brutal truth. You are correct, he conceded, the baritone deeper than usual. The curse makes me incapable of nurturing. I can preserve, but I cannot repair or create. If I command it fixed, the magic works against the repair. The things I care for crumble. That is the true torment. Then, Belle said, finally meeting his gaze, her expression softening marginally, let me command it. I have no care for this place, only a desire to survive. I will find a solution. And she did. Using old architectural texts from the library, she designed a rudimentary system of external gutters and diversions, which the castle's residual magic, being commanded by someone not subject to the curse's specific psychological restriction, was able to implement. The wall was saved. This small act of cooperation, a shared victory against the slow, creeping ruin, was the true beginning of their relationship. Belle had treated him like an administrative problem, and he had responded like a rational man. They began to talk, tentatively at first. He was highly educated, speaking 5 languages and possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of ancient history. She learned that he had been a minor but wealthy prince, a man so consumed by his own power and vanity that he had actively sought out and destroyed the beautiful things others cherished. He had defiled sacred groves, burned art, and humiliated the innocent, not out of malice, but out of a desperate, entitled belief that if he could not possess and control all beauty, no one should enjoy it. The enchantress was not an old woman seeking shelter. She was a powerful, forgotten elemental spirit, a guardian of the forest, whom he had imprisoned and mocked. Her curse was precise: you shall become a shell that reflects the emptiness you created. You will be incapable of giving or receiving genuine beauty until one, who is not blind to the superficiality of man, sees the capacity for goodness that still lives within your shell and chooses to cherish it. He told her this not with self-pity, but with a horrifying clarity of self-loathing. You see, Isabel, he murmured one night, as she was charting the movements of stars he could no longer truly appreciate, I am cursed, because I was ugly on the inside first. The beast is merely the outward tax I pay for the inward tyrant I was. Belle, who was now reading to him, not for his entertainment, but for her own, understood. Her compassion was not romantic pity, it was the recognition of a shared, monumental suffering. She was captive to her father's foolishness, and he was captive to his own monstrous history. One evening, while descending a rickety, unmagicked staircase in the oldest tower, Belle misstepped on a loose block of masonry. She felt the stone give way and the air rush from her lungs. Before she could fall, a huge, black paw shot out from the gloom. It grasped her by the cloak with surprising gentleness, holding her suspended until she found her footing. It was the first physical contact they had ever shared. Thank you, she whispered, heart hammering. The curse will not permit me to let you fall, he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion she couldn't place. It demands that I protect what is mine, even if I wish it were not so. But Belle knew his words were a lie he told himself for self-preservation. She saw the genuine terror in his eyes when she slipped, a terror of loss, not of failure to uphold a covenant. In that moment, she realized she had not loved him, but she had certainly stopped fearing the monster and begun fearing for the man trapped inside. A year passed. The single rose, still encased in its bell jar, was losing its luster. The petals had begun to curl inward, the deep red fading to a bruised, dull purple. The beast was changing too. His movements, which had once been stiff with shame, were now slow with depletion. The curse was draining his vitality, regardless of the rose's state, because the necessary choice had not yet been made. One morning, the beast brought her the magic mirror. He had never offered it before, terrified of seeing her expression upon viewing her lost home. Go to the dining hall, he instructed, standing at a distance. Look into the mirror and tell me what you see. Belle took the heavy, silver-backed mirror to the hall and looked inside. The image was murky, but clear enough. She saw her father. He was in their bed, thin and weak, clutching his chest. Rosalie and Clarice were nowhere to be seen, having clearly abandoned the invalid to his fate. He was dying of grief and consumption. Belle returned to the beast, tears finally staining her face, not tears of fear for herself, but tears of sorrow for her father. He is failing, she said simply. The beast turned his massive head away. He has little time left. The curse is clear. Once the last petal falls, I am no more. But you have fulfilled your bargain. You stayed. You did not hate me. You improved my prison. You should see your father one last time. He offered her a choice, the only freedom he possessed. Go. Take the horse. Stay with him until the end. I understand. But you must promise me this. If you find that you can bear to return, do so before the rose is entirely dead. Belle looked at the fading flower. The beast was giving her her freedom, at the cost of his own inevitable, lonely demise. His greatest act of cruelty in the past had been taking away others' freedom. His greatest act of humanity was giving hers back. I will come back, Belle promised, not knowing if it was a lie or the truth. She was practical, and the choice was terrifyingly simple. Choose her father, or choose the slow, strange life she had built with the monster. She left the castle and raced through the forest. Belle arrived home to a cold house and the smell of sickness. She found her father struggling for breath. Her sisters had gone to live with distant, wealthy cousins, unable to bear the burden of poverty or illness. She nursed Maurice, feeding him broth and telling him stories of her eccentric, wealthy employer, who had demanded her services as a librarian. She spoke of the peace she had found, not of the terror. After a week, Maurice's breathing eased. He looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time in months. Did you see him? He whispered. Every day, Papa. And what of the monster? Belle squeezed his hand. The monster, Papa, is what you were afraid of. The man is simply suffering. As Maurice finally slept soundly, Belle looked around the small, comfortable house. The outside world, which she had longed for, felt suddenly small, petty, and loud. The endless talk of fashion, the gossip, the small, grasping selfishness of her sisters, it all seemed trivial against the monumental, agonizing silence of the beast's castle. She realized the outside world had offered her freedom, but the castle had offered her purpose. She looked at the small rose her father had taken, now dried and brittle on the mantelpiece. The single, fading rose in the bell jar had only 2 petals left. She had been gone for 10 days. The beast was dying. He had kept his word. She didn't wait for her father to wake. She didn't write a note. She simply put on her cloak, took a loaf of bread, and mounted the horse. This was no romantic rush of desperate love. It was the realization of an emotional debt, a deliberate choice based on respect and necessity. She was going back to the man who had shown her his soul, not his face. She reached the castle just as the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the courtyard. The residual magic was failing. The fires had died, the prepared food was cold, and a biting chill had finally penetrated the walls of her chamber. She ran through the silent halls, straight to the central courtyard. The glass dome was shattered, the ice having expanded in the failed climate control. The single rose bush was withered. Only 1 petal remained, clinging desperately to the stem. The beast was lying on the cold stone, near the wreckage of the dome. He had reverted to his most basic, skeletal form, the heavy hide and sharp bone prominent, his breath shallow, rasping. He looked like an ancient, dying thing carved from volcanic rock. Belle knelt beside him. She did not recoil from the feel of his harsh skin. You came back, he managed, the words catching in his throat like gravel. Foolish. You were free. I was not, Belle said, resting her palm gently on his jagged cheek. I was free of you, but not free of my choice. I returned because I respect the man you allowed yourself to become in this cage. I have seen your patience, your mind, and your agonizing kindness. I have seen the prince, and he is a better, truer man than the tyrant ever was. She leaned down, her lips brushing the top of his matted head. I have learned to love you, my lord. Not despite the beast, but because of the goodness the beast had to fight so hard to save. I choose you. As the final, purple petal detached from the stem and floated down, it did not land on the stone. It landed on Belle's hand. There was no blinding flash of light, no orchestral swell. Instead, there was a sound like dry wood splitting, and the beast cried out not in pain, but in profound, shaking relief. Belle watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the heavy, coarse hide of the beast began to crack, shedding away like old, dry bark. His unnatural height shrank marginally, his sharp teeth receded, and the heavy bone structure softened. When it was finished, lying beneath the broken shell of the beast was a man, older than the legends claimed, with lines of deep sorrow etched around his mouth and eyes. He was handsome, yes, but exhausted and marked. His eyes, though clear, still held the distant memory of the centuries of cold. He sat up, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He was real. I am free, he whispered, touching his own face with a newly human hand. But this is not the end of the debt, Isabel. This is the beginning of the work. They did not rush to marry or celebrate. They spent the next year systematically repairing the castle, not with magic, but with stone, timber, and mortar, supervised by the experienced eye of Maurice, whom the prince immediately sent for. They hired good carpenters and gardeners, compensating them fairly. They cleared the courtyard and planted a new garden, tending to the soil with human hands. The real story of Beauty and the Beast was not about a girl's ability to see past a frightening exterior. It was about a girl's unwavering ability to recognize administrative and ethical neglect and a prince's long, agonizing journey to confront the internal monster of entitlement. He found freedom not through a spell being broken, but through the deliberate, conscious choice of another person who chose to value him for his capacity to change, a profound act of creation that even the most powerful magic could not replicate. They lived, not happily ever after, but purposefully ever after, ensuring that their home and their hearts were never again allowed to fall into cold, self-inflicted ruin. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe the channel and like the video. Thank you.